So now we're actually going to talk about something that is a little more near and dear to my heart. And I'm going to start by being a little bit, a lot bit transparent on this story. I am part of an organization that lobbied for the Pretrial Fairness Act to pass. And we were one of the driving forces in maintaining the people in the primaries that just passed recently, who passed that and also passed the Clean Energy Jobs Act. So just understand the lens that I look through inside of this story has that skew. All right. So having said all that, we've been recently hearing or seeing, you guys talked about on Friday's show, I think it was, the newspaper mailer that went out that was
yellow journalism to support Darren Bailey, courtesy of that right-wing scumbag, I forgot his name, who's been funding and financing the Republican attempt to regain power in the downstate in the governor's office.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and one of the things that it was very much fear-mongering, and I've actually heard a lot of fear-mongering in regards to is, pardon me, I'm drinking soda water, the Pretrial Fairness Act. And so
they're dog whistling to all the affluent white neighborhoods and communities that the black people are going to come after them.
They're coming to the suburbs, basically. I mean, that newspaper was.
I know.
It was it was a rough read. Yeah. So I just wanted to cover a little bit of what the Pretrial Fairness Act basically does, but more so, I wanted to talk about like what being held before trial like looks like generally, just an overview of how it impacts people, and what we could do instead.
Quick question.
Yes.
After you present this story, actually, Kit and I talked about this on Hard Lens Media, and we had a video from a public defender that went into it also. I don't know if you have that video because I didn't get a chance to look at the notes, but after you've shared this,
I don't have a
when you're done, I'll find the video so we can put it at the tail end of your.
That would be great. That would be awesome. I'd love to see it. So we all know that the United States is notorious for having the highest incarceration rates in the world. We have 810 federal, state, and local prisoners for every 100,000 adults, according to a recent Pew study. And one big reason it's so high is that the U.S. also has by far the largest population of defendants who can't make bail and are waiting for their trial while in jail, even though they haven't yet been convicted of anything. In fact, 2/3 of the jail population and 1/4 of the total incarcerated population consist of pretrial detainees. The heavy reliance on cash bail, which is basically a bond that allows you to go free before your trial and then gets returned when you show up, is almost unheard of outside of the United States. Most other countries rely instead on various forms of community supervision and monitoring. And New Jersey does that quite a bit. And I didn't get into the details of New Jersey inside of my report here. But if you want to look at examples of states that have an example of a state that has done bail reform, because I go in a little bit into New York in this report too, where it's really working well. New Jersey is a great example of that. Research shows that legal outcomes for people who are detained pre-trial are considerably more negative than those who are released pre-trial, even controlling for things like the type of charge and other characteristics. One of the biggest reasons is that the vast majority of these defendants take a plea bargain rather than going to trial because they want to get the hell out of jail. It's a terrible place to be. It's chaotic, stressful, incredibly boring, sometimes violent, and sometimes has bad medical care. And of course, staying in jail means they risk losing employment and housing, not to mention the relationship strain of not being available for childcare and other obligations they have in the community. But then when they do a plea bargain, people who are locked up tend to get longer prison sentences in their plea bargain than those who aren't because they posted bail, which does not seem right. First off, there's always going to be bail. So when we're talking about alternatives, bail is still something that's going to be available as an option for a judge. If we just think of it as a mechanism for getting people out pre-trial, the choice is between cash bail and some alternative system. Defendants might be put on electronic monitoring, for example. Community organizations get involved to make sure the defendants go to court. And some states have pretrial service agencies that supervise people on release, like probation. The agency will make sure that people look for work and they attend programs or treatments and anger management, anything that they need and that they wouldn't be doing while they're in jail. Some states have the 10% system where a judge sets the bail and the defendant deposits 10%. And then if they don't go to the court, then they owe the rest of it. And then Illinois has actually implemented many of these same procedural reforms, but went even further and completely got rid of cash bail altogether, which is the first country to do that. So we would be holding people who the judge sees as a violent offender, and we would be allowing people who are non-violent offenders to, go and take care of their lives while they await their trial. So what does that look like? I mean, how does it compare? So between states that, comparisons between states find that cash bail is not any more effective than non-cash bail systems at getting defendants to show up for court. All of the charts and research studies are all in our description and in our description notes. You should check them out. They're pretty incredible. Most people just want to get their case over with, so the rates of turning up are very high. Upwards of 90%. And pretrial crime isn't any higher in New Jersey than in the have fully cash bail systems. They were one of the first states to start instating bail reform. And arguably, some argument that cash bail can be harmful to the public safety, since it means that people's ability to get out of jail ultimately depends on their financial situation. And one more thing before I open it up to you all, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've heard through the grapevine for other bail reform that didn't work, because I do want to cover that side of things. But one more thing when it comes to Illinois and the Pretrial Fairness Act that I really want to highlight is that anyone who is blaming the Pretrial Fairness Act right now for the rise in crime is full of shit, because it doesn't go into effect until 2023. Okay, so the Pretrial Fairness Act hasn't into effect yet. And so anybody saying that it's causing the rise in crime is lying to you. All right, I didn't get to see what Eleanor put up. Let's have our French Revolution in America. I think it's about time the billionaires knows what it's like to live in fear.
What it's like to live in fear.
Mm-hmm.
And this
well, Pat, that's a great point too. People, inside of those studies, they seem skewed also. And I said, well, that doesn't seem fair, but Pat makes a great point. People who post bail are better off and higher class. They're treated better. And they probably have lawyers to help them with their situation, because that was something I didn't even bring up. What's up, Jerry?
Well, I have that video that relates to the yellow journalism of those newspapers by Olayemi Olorin that was shared on TikTok regarding the purge law in Chicago. So I just want to I have it queued up whenever you want me to share it, because it directly relates to what we're talking about.
Why don't we go ahead and watch it right now?
You got it, babe. Here we go. Play.
Listen to me. It cannot be understated how significant of a role the media plays in quashing progressive movements and keeping more Black people in jail. It's frustrating because every time we say the criminal system isn't broken, it's working as intended, these are the outlets and institutions that respond, no, we still need to have faith in the system. We need reform, we need reform, we need reform. But then every time we actually get substantive progressive reform, here they go with campaigns like this filled with lies. And please trust that it's not a coincidence that they're going to places like the Shade Room and Baller Alert with Black audiences to peddle these lies, because what they want is for Black people to internalize propaganda and lies so that we don't support progressive initiatives that are designed to keep us out of jail. So I'm going to dispel these myths about the purge law, because there is no purge law. All there is a concerted effort by media, right-wing Republicans, and neoliberals to keep Black people in jail.
I'm glad she mentioned the neoliberals, too.
Rikers is infamous. But less people realize that Rikers is a pre-trial detention center, meaning the people incarcerated at Rikers have not been convicted of a crime. Last year, 16 people died in Rikers. This year, 13 people died in Rikers, and Rikers has already been declared a human rights crisis. So what if I told you that the crisis happening at Cook County Jail was worse? Cook County Jail is the pre-trial detention center in Chicago, Illinois, meaning The people incarcerated at Cook County Jail have not been convicted of a crime. They simply just don't have the money for bail. And that's an important point people need to understand about bail. Bail is not about public safety. Bail is about whether or not you can afford your freedom, period. I am a public defender who represents people that are incarcerated at Rikers, where people are killed, people are beaten, people are sexually assaulted, people spend years of their life. And I'm telling you.
She hasn't been to Cook County Jail or Holman Square.
Yeah.
Find out that there are people sitting in Cook County Jail waiting on a trial for 4 years, 8 years, even 11 years. So let me tell you about what the Chicago Public Safety Act would do. The first lie being circulated is that this bail reform will prevent police from being able to make arrests. False.
Nope.
Nice. Police arrest whoever they want, like they've always been able to. All the bail reform law does is encourage them not to make completely low-level arrests that they could write tickets for.
Gamer and Ganja for Life. Yeah, we did on HLM. I didn't realize Kira was going to cover it tonight, and it's completely related. So,
you want to know what else? A law enforcement agency proposed that language. The Public Safety Act would take low-level crimes, low-level misdemeanors, non-violent crimes, and instead of those being bail eligible, where you sit in jail because you don't have the money, you fight your case from the outside because now judges cannot set bail and keep you incarcerated for something they probably otherwise would not have been able to. What this Public Safety Act would do is it would get rid of the cash bail system. It doesn't mean that nobody goes to jail pre-trial. It means that instead of whether or not you're free or you're in jail being determined based on how much money you have, instead, prosecutors would have 3 different options that they could keep you detained should they so choose.
And this also has to do with the judges looking at the circumstances and being able to determine, yeah, this is a violent offender. This is somebody we need to keep in here as opposed to nonviolent petty crime offenders that are stuck for God knows how long because they don't have bail.
Prosecutors will have an option to present evidence to the judge showing that you are a threat to public safety or that you have engaged in some kind of willful flight from prosecution, or if you're simply charged with most felonies and they can have you detained pre-trial. The reality is that the vast majority of people in our criminal system are living well beneath the poverty line. They're represented by public defenders because they cannot afford representation, which is a fact. The same court that will then place high bail on them they know they can't afford it. So it's a tactic by which we put poor people in jail for things we probably couldn't prove at trial. They'll probably never have a trial. It's a way to coerce them into plea deals. But it is not about public safety because at the end of the day, if you have the money, you can buy your freedom.
It's got about another minute left, but I think you get the gist and how it relates.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And just a kind of a personal anecdote. Before the uprising back in the summer of 2020, right before that all happened, I had hooked up with a woman who had been protesting outside of Cook County because her husband, who was being held pre-trial, had died from COVID. So, I mean, again, like these are real people. And she is still on a just complete mission to, make this happen. Obviously pretrial fairness was a huge win for her and her purposes, but she just keeps going. Her name's Cassandra Greer. So if you ever want to join that sort of a push in Chicago, you can check her out. She's amazing. So, and then, some other things, just because, it's funny because we just hear a lot of stuff, right? Like those mailers went out, they were kind of obvious, propaganda, but we do hear a lot of stuff about this, this is what's going to be causing a spike in crime, or this is what is causing a spike in crime. So I had asked Ed, I was like, I thought I had heard something like a few folks in California saying that like they had some sort of like bail reform or whatever, and it was causing some kind of issues with violent offenders being released and blah, blah, blah. And I actually looked it up and they're still working on it. There's actually nothing that was passed in the world of bail reform, even though I am not shocked there at all. Heard through the grapevine that was one of the reasons was bail reform. And so that was kind of, I had to chuckle to myself. And then I was like, well, what about New York? Because I'm hearing the same stories there. And in New York, by the time the 2019 changes went into effect, New York City had already seen a marked decline in the use of cash bail. It was about by 32% of a decrease in the use of cash bail between 1987 and 2020. And actually, their crime plummeted during that period of time, even though cash bail, setting cash bail was down by 32%. And so then in 2019, they did their bail reform. And as we know, come 2020, we had some of the biggest crime waves we've seen in a while throughout the entire country. So Dr. Marie von Nostrand, a scholar of criminal justice systems who studied New York City's data, said that she had seen an increase in offenses among people who had been released to await trial after being charged with violent felonies, she said. So she actually said that after that law went through, she did witness people with violent felonies being released. And so there is that piece. Data from the Criminal Justice Agency shows that the number of people who were facing violent felony charges were released to await trial and then were charged with committing new violent felonies, Jesus Christ, has risen to 320 in the first quarter of 2021 compared to 259 in 2020 and 160 in 2019. So almost an increase of 100 a year later, 19 to 2020, and then another, 80, 2020 to 2021. And many law enforcement officials have tied the release of such defendants to recent uptick in shootings and killings across the state. But Dr. von Nostrand said that the violent crime was increasing across the city, and those increases were not were too substantial for those smaller numbers. So she doesn't think that it's that it is directly related to their bail reform system, but those, I just wanted to bring in some of the things that I'd been hearing and that many people might have been hearing. Because everybody is tying bail reform to a rise in violent crime. And it's not proven to be true at all.
Are you saying
this is such a crock of shit?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, Gene says, well, that's easy to solve. Just don't release violent offenders.
Yeah,
Genius. Right. All right.
One thing to add about California's situation. In March of 2021, the California Supreme Court held that detaining someone pretrial simply because they cannot afford bail violates due process and equal protection clauses.
Ooh, okay.
And they says, while not ending cash bail, the court did hold that if, after considering the myriad of other options available to the court to ensure public safety and the defendant's appearance at court, cash bail is found to be the only option, an inquiry must be made into the defendant's ability to pay. So it's something.
It is something. Okay.
It's not, but it's not an actual legal law measure that ends cash bail in California.
Okay, great. And I'm glad that you clarified that, because I had been very confused as to what people were referring to, because most of what I was hearing was somewhat anecdotal, versus statistical, more abstract. And so I was like, maybe, there's probably something to those stories, right? But the numbers just don't bear out that way. And so I think that this will be better for people who are impacted, obviously, by this, because people are being held for years, you guys, years, because they don't have bail. And especially now when the courts are so backed up, it's just not okay to keep people from their families and their livelihood that long.
Yeah. And the short version is, you end cash bail. What does that do? It just makes the judge's decision or their job a little bit harder, because they actually have to really make a decision on whether this person is a risk.
And as I said on the Hardlands Media Show, people don't realize the power they have selecting their judges, because they go into the ballot booth and they see all these names they don't recognize, when there are websites like what's that one? Girl, You Go. Do you remember? Girl, I Guess, that gives you a good overview of who's who, what their record's been like, so you can judge for yourself before going into no, I don't want this guy retained. because these are the judges that are part of the problem that aren't doing their jobs because they're too fucking lazy.
Mhm.
So this is something that is related to good judicial conduct as well, which is unfortunately a lot of people don't realize.